5 months and counting. That's how long the inmates at the Guantanamo Bay prison have been refusing food to protest in what they call inhumane treatment. Despite international outrage over the situation, the hunger strike is showing no signs of ending. And today, we're taking a close look at why. So nearly 2/3 of the inmates have now joined the protest against their indefinite detention without trial. 45 of those prisoners are being strapped to a chair and having nutrients forced down their nose twice a day. And 3 inmates are undergoing similar feeding procedures in hospital. The government says the procedure is done in the most humane way possible and is trying to prevent death by using it. Well, RT's Ghana Chichikar looks at how the controversial practice is actually carried out and what the prisoners say about it.
The UN calls for the U.S. to stop force-feeding Guantanamo hunger strikers. The practice is against international law and is seen by many as a form of torture. And here's why. First, the guards strap the detainee down to a chair, like this one. Then they put a mask over his face so that the detainee can't move, bite, or spit. Then the nurse snakes the feeding tube into nasal cavity. The feeding tube, which is roughly the size of a pen's ink cartridge, or this. Well, this is not an actual feeding tube, but it gives you an idea. And this area is very rich in nerve endings, and patients report extreme pain during the procedure. And the nurse pushes the tube further down the throat, creating a tightness that makes breathing difficult. At that point, patients typically feel pressure on their chest and lungs. Some say it feels like they're drowning. Then the staff tapes the tube to the detainee's nose so that they can't bite or swallow it. And then 2 cans of nutritional substance are being funneled through the tube. Now, we wrote to Guantanamo and asked whether they use an anesthetic for this seemingly painful procedure. Here's their response. Typically not, however, it is available if the detainees request it. Most detainees prefer to use standard olive oil to lubricate the tube. U.S. officials are trying to make it sound like it's not as bad, but here's how one of the detainees, a Yemeni man, Samir Naji al-Hassan Makbel, describes what force feeding actually feels like.
I will never forget the first time they passed the feeding tube up my nose. I can't describe how painful it is to be force-fed this way. As it was thrust in, it made me feel like throwing up. I wanted to vomit, but I couldn't. There was agony in my chest, throat, and stomach. I had never experienced such pain before. I would not wish this cruel punishment upon anyone.
We also asked the Guantanamo official how many detainees resist the procedure and how many give their consent to it. And he wrote back saying the majority of the detainees report compliantly and do not resist. Detainees are given a choice to eat a hot meal, drink the liquid nutrient, or be enteral fed. The detainees see the choice differently. Take a listen.
When they come to force me into the chair, if I refuse to be tied up, they call the ERF team. So I have no choice. Either I can exercise my right to protest my detention and be beaten up, or I can submit to painful force feeding.
For most people, these detainees are out of sight, out of mind. As sad as it is, they see physical suffering as the only way to draw the world's attention to their plight. We can't hear their voices, but here's what they write.
I'm doing this because I want to know my destiny. I cannot abide not knowing anymore.
I just hope that because of the pain we are suffering, the eyes of the world will once again look to Guantanamo before it is too late.
Indefinite detention is the worst form of torture.
Respect us or kill us. It's your choice. The U.S. must take off its mask and kill us.
The Obama administration doesn't want Guantanamo inmates to die, but neither is it in a rush to give the detainees their lives back. In Washington, I'm Ganesh Chekyan.
Around 140 people from the U.S. Navy's medical personnel are performing these procedures. Dr. Frank Arnold, he believes that these medics are being negligent and abusive towards the detainees only because they're following orders from the military.
The regime which the Joint Task Force for Guantanamo has written for the treatment of these people requires truly abusive care and also involves the use of medicines which are dangerous. They are not allowed to behave like doctors and are compelled by the military hierarchy to behave like jailers. In particular, Several of them have commented to me through their lawyers that when they ask the doctors, for example, to stop the environmental manipulation which leaves them freezing at night or waking them at night for various disturbances, the doctor says they have no power to do anything. And as one of them said, one of the hunger strikers, what is the point of a doctor like that?
Well, do stay with us here on RT because we've got more extensive coverage of the Guantanamo hunger strike, including a first-hand account from a former prisoner and a legal perspective from a military lawyer. We continue with our coverage of the ongoing hunger strike at Guantanamo Bay. Shortly, I hope to be joined by US Federal Public Defender Carlos Warner. Now, his client is on hunger strike at the moment at the Guantanamo facility, and we'll be talking to him a little later. Now, earlier, I spoke to Muazzam Beg, who spent nearly 2 years at the infamous prison. He says that every detainee in Guantanamo is being tortured in one way or another.
I say that everybody who'd been held in Guantanamo has been tortured or abused in one way. I mean, when I was first taken into custody, it was the most torturous process I think that any person could ever have imagined. It meant being stripped naked. It meant being invasively, your body being searched, your cavity searches as they call it. It meant having your hair shaved off, being punched and kicked and spat upon. At one occasion, it was in the background facility before I went to Guantanamo. I was subjected to the sounds of a woman screaming. I was led to believe it was my wife being tortured. So everybody, in a sense, is being tortured. And the worst sort of torture, of course, is the psychological sort in which you're in solitary confinement, unable to know what it is that you've done for which you're paying the ultimate price, which is your freedom. If the hunger strikes continue in the way that they are, then the force feeding is not the solution. The solution is to give them justice, and that's the reason why they're doing it. They're not doing it because of all of the abuses. Those are peripheral. They're doing it because they've been held for 12 years now almost without charge or trial and any normal legal normative system.
Well, the United States is running up quite a bill by keeping Guantanamo Bay open. $150 million per year. That's how much the Pentagon is spending on the facility. Now, that's roughly $1 million per prisoner. Compare that to the costs of regular inmates housed within the US, you're seeing here. Or to put that into perspective, the average American citizen earns nearly 18 times less than what the government pays for each Guantanamo prisoner. Well, earlier I spoke to Lieutenant Colonel Barry Wingard. He's a military lawyer representing one of the inmates on hunger strike, and he told me that keeping the prison operating is purely a political move, with Washington ignoring the fact the vast majority of inmates have no charges against them at all.
98% of these men, 11 and a half years later, have no charges against them. Let me say that again. I think that's a critical point. 98% of these men have no allegations against them, let alone them ever hoping to get a trial. That's 98%. The military has promised us that they can do up to 20 prosecutions, 20 prosecutions of the 779 men who've been held there, over half of which, even today, over half are cleared for release. So to say we can't release them because they might do something in the future is completely ridiculous. Look, we understand that Guantanamo Bay is there because we're fighting the emotion of terror internationally. But that the fact that we're fighting something that can't be conquered and the fact that Guantanamo Bay remains open is still unjust and should be rectified immediately. We can't allow this humanitarian violation to continue. I think there's a sense in Washington, D.C. that, you know, we don't care whether these men did anything or not. They're going to stay in Guantanamo Bay forever because it's good for us politically. And that is completely the wrong answer, you know? If President Obama wanted to, he could at least attempt to stop the hunger strike. I was in Guantanamo Bay last week, and I saw no indication of any action to even end the hunger strike, let alone send these men back home or give them justice in some form.
And earlier I spoke to Tony Camarino. He served in the US Air Force for nearly 2 decades and conducted more than 1,000 interrogations. And he says the Guantanamo detainees are al-Qaeda's main recruitment targets.
I still work in the Middle East, and I still hear time in and time out from people there on the street that Guantanamo Bay represents the idea that America is at war against Muslims. It's not at war against criminals who commit terrorist acts. And we cannot erase what's happened at Guantanamo Bay in the past, regardless of how well, hard we try. Guantanamo Bay, as I learned in Iraq when we debriefed foreign fighters, was Al-Qaeda's #1 recruitment tool along with Abu Ghraib. And it will continue to be so, and as long as it is open, and especially in light of the fact that 86 of the 166 detainees have been cleared of any wrongdoing and cleared for release. This is, the indefinite detention of innocent people is a great selling point for Al-Qaeda to recruit new fighters, that America is not the country that it says it is.
On air and online as well, we're extensively covering the ongoing hunger strike in the Guantanamo Bay prison. You can log on to our website, rt.com, to follow every day of the protest, the Guantanamo timeline there on our website. Now, here's Irina Galushka's report. She looks at President Obama's failed attempts to keep his promise to close the camp.
As president, I have tried to close Gitmo. I transferred 67 detainees to other countries before Congress imposed restrictions to effectively prevent us from either transferring detainees to other countries or imprisoning them here in the United States.
This statement, coming from the person many refer to as the most powerful man in the world, may sound sincerely frustrated, but many believe it has little honesty to it.
President Obama has been balking on this. He's been claiming that he can't do anything, and that's simply not true. He's operating a drone assassination program, claiming he has the power to do that as President of the United States, and yet somehow he's claiming that he doesn't have the power to close down a military prison, and he's the commander-in-chief of the United States Armed Forces. Isn't that a bit strange?
The official and most often cited reason for not releasing prisoners, even the 86 cleared of all charges, they have no place to go. Especially the so-called indefinite detainees, terror suspects considered too dangerous to let go, but impossible to try in either civil or military court. Largely because evidence supporting claims of their terror activity has allegedly been received through torture and interrogation, which cannot be used as evidence in court. The very existence of these men was shrouded in secrecy, with the U.S. officially revealing their identities only several weeks back, after they had been in detainment for years. There are still those who believe being held at Guantanamo is tantamount to staying at a luxury resort in tropical paradise.
I don't know that there's a terrorist treated better anywhere in the world than what's happened at Guantanamo. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars to build a facility that has more comforts than a lot of Americans get.
But despite claims that Guantanamo is just short of a vacation camp, perhaps of its exotic location, it remains one of the world's most notorious prisons, where people are held without trial for years, and the conditions are such that inmates choose to go without food for 5 months rather than accept the conditions they're being held in. In Cuba, Irina Galushko, RT.
I'm now joined by U.S. Federal Public Defender Carlos Warner. His client is on hunger strike at the moment at Guantanamo Bay. So tell us, give us an idea of the condition your client is in at the moment.
Well, I have 11 of them, and they are all in terrible condition. We've been talking with them. We got word last week that one of our clients was intubated through the lung, meaning the tube went into his lung, causing him to be hospitalized. So the force feeding, again, is torture. It remains probably one of the worst things that happens in Guantanamo. And they're suffering. Since the president's speech, we are still at the same numbers. In fact, the numbers have grown. There are now, as I understand, 106 people on hunger strike. 44 of them are being force-fed, which means the majority of them are being force-fed, with several hospitalized.
And concerning the legality of this force feeding, Obama is saying that the U.S. federal court cannot intervene in this matter. So for you as a lawyer, what can you do now?
Well, I think it's a matter of international pressure. The American Medical Association, human rights groups, everybody has come out to say that it's wrong and that it's torture, and that a voluntary person has a right to refuse treatment. And if they choose to die, they should be allowed to die. The fact of the matter is that we're talking about innocent men, as I heard earlier in your program, 86 of them, that should be released immediately. They're not being released for no good reason at all, and they're choosing to go on hunger strike. And they're being force-fed, and now that Ramadan's going to start, I believe they're going to be extracted from their cells at night and force-fed at night. So it's a terrible situation, and there's no end that's in sight. And the president does have it, as I told you months ago, and it remains the same. The president has the power now to transfer those men, and he's choosing not to do it.
Of course, the medical teams there in the prison say it's their duty, it's their role, it's ethical, it's obviously against human rights if they allow people to die there in the prison. But what would the implications be if somebody did die? Would it change the situation at all from Washington's point of view?
Well, somebody eventually is going to die. I mean, the military itself has said that it's not a sustainable situation. We're at 150 days. We don't know how long it will go on, but eventually, with this population of men that are aging, being fed this way, somebody is going to die. And I guess what will happen is that I'll do many more interviews about it, and it'll be tragic. But it doesn't have to be that way, because the president, again, could use the current authority he has from Congress to transfer these individuals. And the places are there. They can go there in a month if the president wanted him to. Instead, he's put the special envoy on, and they're going to look at everything. It's another 6 months, it's another 8 months of the same thing over and over while my clients are suffering. It's unnecessary.
And again, from your point of view, the UN and many other organizations say this is against international law, the indefinite detention and the fact that these prisoners, many of them, are being held without charge. So how has the US so far got away with this? And why have you failed to succeed in getting your prisoners out?
Well, Guantanamo is a lawless place. It was designed there for that purpose by Dick Cheney. He wanted to make it a place where there is no law. So the ability of lawyers to come in there and actually extract people through the law is impossible. You have to do it through pressure. You have to do it through international pressure. The fact that these doctors who are tube feeding clients need to know that when they come back to the United States, there's going to be ethical charges against them. Our president needs to feel pressured to close down Guantanamo. And although he makes the talk, I don't think that the real pressure is there yet. Obviously, if he felt pressured, he could be transferring these individuals right now, the cleared ones, under the current authority he has under the NDAA. He's still choosing not to. He still hasn't appointed an envoy in the Pentagon. And while there are signs that there are people working on it in the White House, certainly there isn't anybody in the White House who has grabbed this problem by the throat and said that we're gonna close Guantanamo.
U.S. Federal Public Defender Carlos Warner, thanks very much indeed for joining us live here on RT.
It is not a surprise to me that we've got problems in Guantanamo. During a time of budget cuts, we spend $150 million each year to imprison 166 people. Gitmo has become a symbol around the world for an America that flouts the rule of law.